Catch You Outdoors, presented by the Waypoint Podcast Network at waypointtv.com. I'm your host, Captain Rob Modes, reporting to you listeners each week from the fabulous Florida Keys. This podcast is centered around the great outdoors. Fishing, boating, beaching, bicycling, hiking, camping, most everything else you can possibly think of related to spending time outside of the home, or most especially your office. So kick back for the next 40 minutes or so and get a taste of my Florida. This week's episode is number 78, Saltwater Fishing Questions. I know, real original, right? And we'll get to that in a minute. But first, some announcements. Ding Darling National Wildlife Sanctuary on Sanibel Island is going to reopen on April the 4th. That is some huge news after going through Hurricane Ian and the terrible destruction that it did on that island. And my former semi-hometown of Fort Myers Beach. But anyway, this includes the Wildlife Drive and the Nature Store. They're both going to open on April 4th, so that's really cool. The Nature Drive is something that most locals know a lot about. Some people in Fort Myers don't even know much about it, but if you're a fishing person and you'd like to go fishing, you're doing it on foot or kayak, they have availability on the Wildlife Drive to actually fish off of Wildlife Drive. There's these weirs where the water runs from one side of like a small bay out toward Pine Island Sound, and it gets a good water flow, and there's usually a lot of fish in there. And I would suspect that since the fish have not been hammered on for 6 months, that it might be a pretty good bite in there. Check ahead, find out what the opening hours are, find out what you need to do to get in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I used to launch my kayak in there quite a bit. There's a couple of little spots in there where you can launch a kayak, and it's it gives you some really serious good access to some really good fishing in the backcountry. So I'm really happy to hear that's happening. Just more signs of progress. There's a lot more to do. I will say that. It's hard to believe it's been 6 months. Yeah, 6 months since Hurricane Ian blew through. Terrible storm. Yeah, I hope we don't get anything this year. It would be great if we could just stay away from all hurricanes for this upcoming hurricane season. I've published 3 books. What I Know About Fishing Southwest Florida, Bridge to Paradise, and Take a Kid Fishing, an Adult's Guide for Introducing Youngsters to the World of Angling. Pick it up. It's good. I think so. They can be ordered online from my website at catchyoutoutdoors.com. Also from Amazon Kindle. Note the copies from my website are signed copies. The ones from Amazon Kindle are not. If you're a local Keys resident or you're a visitor here, stop by Sandbar Books in Tavernier. Not only do they have my books, they've also got a lot of other local authors' books available in a local authors section, which is expanding. I enjoy that. I love reading stuff written by other people that live in Florida. And Florida's a nice, big, long state. So there's an awful lot of great books out there written by an awful lot of really good authors. And I'm happy to be a part of that. Fishing report. Well, there isn't a personal one from me. Sorry about that. It was windy, man. This past week was just out of control. It just would not stop. And it didn't matter which side of the island you were on. It wasn't doable. So I was kind of sad about that. I got a new boat sitting out there. I'm like, come on, man, give me a break. Let's stop this wind nonsense as soon as possible. Hopefully it'll get better this week. There isn't the personal one, as I said, but I understand from reading fishing reports further down the Keys and in areas that did fish, the dolphin bite, aka mahi, has been very good. So has mutton snapper fishing in about 30 to 40 feet of water. Yellowtail. Let's see, yellowtails are on the patch reefs now. They moved in a little, they kind of gravitate around, mostly found by around the shallower reefs and reef structure. But they've really popped up big time in that 20 foot depth. Got a chum like crazy for them. Get the chum out there, get it worked up, and get those things to come up off the bottom before you try to fish for them. And then mixed in with that'll be mangrove snapper. There'll also be a mix of little stuff. Live shrimp works really, really well. Let me give you a tip for chumming up the yellowtail. Well, first of all, for fishing with chum, I should say chumming's easy. Get you a block of frozen chum, put it in a bag, and hang it off the back of the boat, close to the boat. Don't put a great big long line on it, and don't put it too deep. You want these fish to come up, so you do not want to put your chum bag down too far. They'll come up in the chum line, start munching away. Now, yellowtail are extremely, they're touchy. They're shy. They really are. They're terrible. Leader shy, big time leader shy. So, lightweight line, lightweight leader, a hook, nothing more. Most people don't even weight it. I don't. Put some shrimp on there. Live would be good. Frozen is okay too, but you're probably better off with live because it stays on the hook better. You got the chum going back. You want to drop the line in the chum line and then start letting the line off the reel with the bail open with your fingers, with your fingertips. Just gently let it go back as if it's a piece of chum, and it'll get attacked. And once you've caught a few, it'll drive them back down to the bottom. You may have to shake the chum bag a little bit and start over and get them back up. But because, again, once you catch their friends, they tend to disappear for a little bit. So that's the secret. You got to thread that line back into the chum line without it looking like it's not chum, if that makes sense. Tarpon are on the move early. Well, sort of early, not really early for us. After all, it is March in the Keys. And when I say early to me, having spent a great deal of time on the West Coast up in the Fort Myers area, this would be very early. Normally we look at, middle April, May is when things really get hot, but not down here. It happens a whole lot earlier. So anyway, they're on the move. They start migrating up out of the Keys and start moving toward the north as these waters warm up. And the waters are quite warm this year. We really haven't had much of a winter down here, so they seem to already be pushing around. There's some reports of some really decent catches north of Marathon and also, of course, off of Islamorada, north of Islamorada. Those they could get out. Most people were really complaining about the wind. The trick was finding a spot where they could hide. And, these are guide trips now. These aren't private trips. Guides will go if they can. Let's just put it that way. If they think they can pull it off, they certainly want to. They don't want to stop business or lose business, especially during spring break. But some of them got out, and some of them did really, really well on tarpon. Hopefully I'll be back on the boat later this week. Weather report is starting to look good. Forecast is looking a lot better. So, first day of spring already. Can you believe that? Holy cow. I can't believe that. Now, on to episode 78. Saltwater fishing questions. Episode 78. Really? Seriously? Anyway, well, this is an easy week for subject matter. I got lots of good questions via a bunch of different ways. Emails, text. As a matter, I got quite a few text ones. And just online stuff coming in. And what it was is people were like this. They're like, you talk about doing this, that, and the other. Like I just explained with the yellowtail, I'm going to try to get a little more detailed and not just wash over stuff. They were like, we got questions. We got questions about fishing gear. We got questions about what you use and rods, reels, lures, fishing line, leader, stuff like what do you do? And when you talk about this stuff, you generally you brush over it. Okay, I'm guilty. Guilty as charged. So I decided to put together a podcast. That's why I said this was kind of easy because I got a whole string of these this week, and I thought, wow, this will be so easy. So here we go. No more. I'm not going to do this anymore. By the way, I will try to do as much detail when I talk about a piece of tackle as I can. Let's start with fishing rods. Both spin and fly. Do a little both. The question was basically, what's your go-to? And I don't want to nail it down like that. So what I'll do is I'll give you what I use and what I feel are the most important ones. I'm a backcountry fisherman. I fish in the back, shallow water fishing. For that type of fishing, I pretty much use a 7-foot rod. Medium heavy. Don't let that throw you. Medium heavy in a backcountry style spin rod is quite light compared to if you're saying like medium heavy for an offshore rod. They're two totally different animals. 7-foot medium heavy, fast action on the tip. I like a real good snappy tip. I don't want anything too spongy or too loose on the tip. So you can feel the bite, and also for casting. If you have a rod that's way too spongy on the tip, as I call it, you can't control your cast as well. You really don't know how far it's going to go, no matter how many times you do it. and it just doesn't have the right feel. If you get a rod that's got a good tip on the end of it, it's going to be a lot easier to control the cast and a lot easier to put the cast in the same place over and over again. Since I just said that out loud, it really is a good idea. I mean, years ago, I would be all over the place. I'd have 4 different rods on a boat. Now I try to stick to one manufacturer and try to make them all. And then if I find one I like, I'm going to replace it add to it 2 or 3 more just like it, so that I can have lures already tied on and just easily switch without having to untie and retie. Now, the reason I say that is once you get used to casting one rod, it's going to be the same for all of them. And that way, when you're doing what I do, which is up against mangrove a lot, I can control distance and cast because every single rod I pick up is exactly the same. So that's it's a little tip. It doesn't always work that way. I have mixed in a few that I really like that are single rods. As a matter of fact, I just recently got a custom rod built by Largo Rod Company. And that's a nice rod. So obviously I'll be getting another one. But anyway, that's another story. But it's really good if you can kind of keep them the same. So 7 foot, medium heavy, fast action. That's kind of the main thing. Money spent over $100. Pretty basic. You're going to get a quality rod. You're going to get a quality reel seat handle. The guides, those are little rings, that are on the rod that go from the one end to the other to the tip. Those things are going to be higher, like a Fuji type guide. They're going to be higher quality, and the rod's going to last a lot longer in salt if you just spend a little bit. Get into custom rods, you're probably looking at closer to $300, $250, $330, $340 for a custom rod. Nothing wrong with a custom rod, by the way. As a matter of fact, I highly recommend them because they can manufacture it for you. A lot of times the cork is cut to your hand. It's sized for you. You can get it wrapped the way you want. The threads that are on there, you can, color coordinate it with your boat. Or I've seen a lot of people do school colors. They went to Florida State, Florida, Miami. They'll get the colors done like their Florida school. So that's pretty common. So that's pretty much the basic. Now, the next rod step up from that would be a medium rod. And when I say medium, this is a bulkier rod down by the handle. Okay, so it's thicker. And these are used for, what I use them for is nearshore reef fishing. So this would be something I would take out and do the patch reefs with. Now, I'm not talking deep sea now. I'm talking fishing in 20, 30 feet of water on the patch reefs. Typically out here in the Atlantic Ocean off the Florida Keys. Good for snapper, good for a lot of stuff. Even the accidental grouper, you'll have enough oomph to pull it up off the bottom that you would not have with a backcountry, I call them skinny rods. It's not going to work that way with those. So a heavier rod. That's pretty much it. Everything else pretty much the same, 6.5 to 7 feet long. Just bigger. That's all, just slightly bigger. And then you've got the true offshore rod. I only own 2 of those because I don't go out there that much. Now I have an 18-foot boat that's not going to be going out deep water a lot, although it's really easy to get to 100 foot of water here. You only got to go out about 5 miles, 6 miles, and the water drops off pretty rapidly. A lot of guys call these stand-up rods, or they call them boat rods, or in my case, broomsticks. These are short, 5.5 foot rods. Maybe 6, but very rarely, mostly 5 to 5.5 foot. And they look like a daggone broomstick. They've got a guide on it called roller guides. Those are the guides that actually spin. The guides themselves are like little wheels, basically. So the line has almost no friction while you're working it up and down on really, really big fish. This would be going for, big tuna, billfish, crazy stuff you find, giant grouper, things you find out in the deeper waters. So that's them. That's the 3 of them. That's what I recommend. So we'll get to reels here in just a little bit. I hope that helped. Hope that got a little bit of it done for you so you can figure out what the heck's going on. Something else I didn't really mention on the rod side when I was talking about the money. You're going to spend a lot more money for the deep offshore rods than you are for the inshore rods, just so you know. It's not unusual to easily get into $350, $400 for a decent offshore deep water rod. Those stand-up rods I was mentioning, so keep that in mind. Fishing ain't a cheap game if you do it right. There's a lot of inexpensive equipment out there. Rods break. That's all there is to it. You spend the money, and that's less apt to happen to you. So just keep that in mind. Okay, let's talk about reels to go along with those rods. Two most important things to me for fishing reels are drag system and the weight of the reel. I know that sounds crazy, the last part, but I'll explain in a minute. Drag, crazy important. A reel is a reel is a reel. If you spend $99 or higher, you're going to get a decent saltwater backcountry reel. There's a zillion of them out there. They're made by lots of different companies. Folks gravitate toward Penn. That's a real popular reel. I'd have to say it's one that I've used over the years. They're excellent. They make a lot of different models from the Battle on up. The Battle is their basic saltwater. As of right now, that could change any day. Penn goes into manufacturing changes quite often, but they will keep a line of reels for a long time. So anyway, on that lower price end, it gets back to that saltwater problem too. If you go down to $39 or $49 and you use that reel for a season of saltwater fishing, chances are it's not going to hold up very well against the salt. Everything else is fine, and I don't care how much you watch it, it's just not going to do well. So go to $99 or more. I tend to head in the $200 range. That way I'm going to get a top-notch drag. I'm going to get something that lasts. I'm going to get something that I can disassemble myself and clean and that kind of stuff. So I like Quantum. I'm a real big Quantum smoke fan. I love those things because they're light and they got a crazy drag on them. This gets back to, I'm old. Let's face it, I'm old. And I do not want to sit on a boat or stand on the bow of the boat and cast 4 or 5 hours with a heavy reel. I'm just not going to do it. My elbow will start to hurt, my arm. I'm old. I'm not 20-something years old anymore. So I like lightweight, and Quantum makes an extremely great lightweight reel. And it's a workhorse. It's got a great drag on it. It'll stop a fish, and I've even used them on the patch reefs, the lightweight ones, and it's amazing how well they do. So I'll just throw that brand out there. But shop, there are so many reels out there, and there's so many different reasons to buy them. But center around the drag, find out what the drag's made of, how it works. Also, the feel of the drag. On the front of these reels, spin reels, is a dial, a thing you hold on to tighten and loosen off on the drag. Righty tighty, lefty loosey, if you want to put that in your memory banks. Turn it to the right, it gets tight. Turn it to the left, it loosens off. So some reels are like you start turning right and they are on like right now. Others, you make almost a full turn just to get a little bit of drag going on. That makes a huge difference in the panic moment of a big fish. If you grab that thing and you go too hard on it, and it's one of those reels that has a real quick tighten, you're going to snap that line, or that fish is going to snap the line, no doubt. You're not going to get a second chance at that. So keep that in mind. If you're an excitable fisherman, and you're antsy, whatever you want to call it, and you tend to grab that reel, that drag, and go, I got to munch down on this thing. Try to find one that gives you a little bit of leeway before you do that. So there you go. Nothing really all that fire different in them. If it floats your boat, get it. And if it meets your needs, get it. Let's see what's next on the list. Line. Let's go. We might as well. It's kind of a natural progression here. The other day, actually, it was my brother that was talking about. My brother has used mono for years and has not really gone into the big braid world. And he sent a note and said, "Okay, I need to know something about braid. What do you use and why and all that kind of stuff." So I thought, perfect. I'll just throw that right into this discussion. Braid. Braid's been around for a very long time. I'm going to say the first time I used it is going to be at least 30 years ago. Spider wire. It was advertised by the Bass Boys on bass fishing shows, and that was the first time I'd ever even heard or seen it. I got some. It was terrible. It was absolutely terrible. Not picking on spider wire today. I'm talking about spider wire 30 years ago. So don't get your backs up. That stuff was like wire. Only softer. It was hard to tie. Oh my God. I don't know. I could not understand why anybody would want to mess with it. So I quit. I just dropped off of it. We fished the Florida Keys in the late 90s. That was mono. So it was probably shortly after getting up to Fort Myers, right before I really started my heavy duty guiding career. And I started playing around with a brand called Power Pro. I read about it, heard about it. It was starting to really appear in all the fishing magazines. And it was getting multicolored too. So instead of just green, which is what almost all of them were at first, people were adding color. And you get white, blue, or yellow in the early days. Now, I think red's available now. I'm not sure about that, but I like lighter color fishing line. So when I was using monofilament, I typically use yellow because you can see it. When you fish in salt water, you have current and wind, and they can sometimes oppose each other, which is difficult. If you throw a line in the water and it's green, you can't see the line and you have no idea what it's doing. If you threw a bait over at the mangrove, you don't know if the bait is really at the mangrove 5-6 minutes later or whether it's drifted left or right. You don't know. But with a yellow line on there, you can see it. See the line and see the direction of the line, especially even a bend in the line. So that's why I landed on that stuff. And Power Pro came out with this golden color, which was terrible at first. All new things in the world of fishing. Most of the yellow came off on your fingers when you were putting the line on the reel or running it through your fingers, which, by the way, is dangerous. But braid has really, really come a long way, and I'm a heavy-duty braid user, so I answered my brother with pretty much with this. Power Pro or Cortland. Now, Power Pro is popular, easy to find, lots of different sizes available, lots of different colors available. Cortland, not so much. Cortland is something that I personally have to order online. It's very difficult to find, unless it's being bought in massive reels, not reels, but rolls. I prefer Cortland. That's what I use, and I order it online. If you find a dealer somewhere close to you, then jump on it. But they make a high-vis yellow. It stays yellow in the sunlight, which is important. But more importantly, it's very, very soft. It's just as strong as anybody else's fly line, braided fly line. But it stays soft. When it's soft right off of the spool, it's amazing. It doesn't have that hard feeling about it where it kind of needs to be broken in as you fish it. And I think that's one of the drawbacks that most people have that come from mono to braid. They just don't like the way that it feels. It's easy to tie knots in now, especially the newer stuff is much easier to tie. What else can I say about it? Pound test is really, this is an interesting controversy that's been going on with Cortland and everybody else. People are starting to drop way, way down. When we first started using braid, it was mostly 20-pound test. That's what that was the one that was always missing off the pins in the store. That was the one that sold out was 20-pound. That was kind of like the go-to. Now, you got to remember, 20-pound is like equivalent to about 6-pound test monofilament in circumference. It's very, very skinny. So 20 just seemed comfortable and seemed right. The reality was you don't need that much when you're backcountry fishing. You can go down to 15, 10, or 8, and a lot of people are using 8. The problem with 8-pound test is it will wind knot easily because it has the consistency, the thickness of 2-pound test, which is like thread. It's wonderful to use and it feels good and it'll cast a mile because it's so little, but I've had trouble with wind knots. And of course, now I fish the Florida Keys, which is a lot of open water. If you're fishing in the back areas and you don't have a lot of breeze where you fish, then I would suggest you go down to 8-pound test. But I've recently redone several of my reels to 15 only because it kind of eliminates that problem of the bird's nest, the little loop coming off of the reel after you finish casting. I've also gotten a lot better at looking down at the reel before I close the bail. So there's some tips. High vis yellow, I'd say 8 to 15-pound test, depending on what you're doing with it for inshore fishing, and then you want to bump it up to 30 and 40-pound test when you start going after bigger fish offshore. You can put a lot of line on the reel at a higher break strength because it's so skinny. So you have to imagine on a reel, if you're whining on, say, 20-pound or 30-pound test mono, nowhere near as much fits on the reel as it does if you're doing 30 or 40 or even 50-pound braid. So you can put a lot more line on the reel. What other tips? I don't know. I love it. It's hard for some people, though, to come off of mono and go to it. One of the big problems that I think people run into is you can feel everything. And every little tick, every little bump, there is no stretch in braid, okay? Mono braids, mono stretches. So when you're fishing mono and you hit something, it doesn't send this direct thing right up to your hand. You know, it's like, well, what was that? Braid does. And so it takes a little getting used to in detection of bites versus bumping a rock or something on the bottom. Once you get used to that, there ain't no going back to monofilament. Now let's do leader. So you get the fishing line on. Now you have to put a leader on. Yes, saltwater fishing, you add a leader. For those who have asked me that question, I've gotten quite a bit of that. Yeah, it's a little different. When you fish saltwater, we don't typically just tie our lures right onto the braid. And that's because our fish are leader shy. Well, not all of them, but almost all of them are very, very leader shy. We also have a lot of debris and weirdness in the water. We have rocks, reefs, barnacles, dock pilings, bridge pilings, everything you can think of that'll break you off. So we like to have a little stronger, what's referred to as a tippet or a bite tippet in fly fishing, this little piece, this leader piece. I'll usually rip off 3 or 4 feet as a standard, but sometimes longer when I'm reef fishing, but 3 to 4 feet is usually plenty. And I typically go with 30. Man, now this is Florida Keys now. It's going to vary. Like when I was fishing the west coast of Florida, it was primarily 20 in the back because you don't run into a lot of weird toothy creatures like barracudas in the back. Here you do, so 30 will certainly help you if you get a cuda on sometimes. It depends how hard he hits it to begin with. But all in all, I really do go with standard of 30. I rarely drop down to 20. I will use 20 and lower when I'm doing something like I mentioned earlier, yellowtail fishing, where I'm trying to drift something back and fool those fish. I will go lighter because that's pretty much all I plan on catching in the chum line. Yeah, I'll get hit by something small, sharp, cuda, something will appear and take it off, but the odds of that are far less than like fishing in the back country up against hard bottom or mangroves where in this area cudas are known to hang out. So anyway, fluorocarbon. Up in years ago, we tied on clear mono. That was the go-to. You know, you tie on a clear piece of 20-pound mono, and that was your leader, no matter what line you had on. Nowadays, it's fluorocarbon, and by the way, there are different grades of fluorocarbon. If you've ever looked, there are all different types of. There's pure fluoro, and then there are mixtures. There are hybrids, and be careful because some of the hybrids still have a little mono mixed in with them, and they're not as disappearing as a true fluorocarbon lure would be. Here in the Keys, there was a big deal, not a controversy, but pink versus clear. Down here, pink is used all the time. It's very common. Pink disappears in water better than the clear does. I know that don't sound right. I know that sounds crazy, but it's true. The test that I did in sunlight over I've spoken to this. I think I even wrote about this in my first book. I put a piece of fluorocarbon, clear and pink, on the top of my step on my pool in the backyard on a nice sunny day, sun overhead. The fluorocarbon that was clear left a little shadow on the bottom, and the pink didn't. It refracts light differently. And the pink totally disappeared when it went into the pool water. You could not see it. So there you go. Down here in the Keys, that's been known for a long time. So a great many people here use pink over clear. Same strength, same type, that kind of stuff. But they do go for pink. So there you go. Hooks. Dun, 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 dun. Wow, too many. All pretty good. All real good, actually. Hook manufacturing has come a long way since the ones that bend and break and all that kind of stuff. So I'm an owner man, O-W-N-E-R. I'm an owner man. I love owner hooks. Always have, always will. I haven't had a reason to change. I know when they're out, I will slide over to Gamakatsu, one of those, one of the other manufacturers that are extremely popular, Mustad, things like that. But I like owner hooks. Owners are a little more costly. They're built like a brick. They are really, really hard to break. They're hard to bend. And I use them for everything. My standard just go-to circle hook that I use for just doing bottom fishing all the way up to replacing hooks on my lures. I will get owner inline hooks and redo them with owners if I can find them. They're not as easy. Sometimes I have to order those online too. You don't always find them at the fishing shops, but I'm a fan. I'm a big fan. I think I started using owner with offset bass hooks with the original things I actually bought. It wasn't the typical ones that I would use in salt. Way back in the day, 30 years ago or so, I became a big fan of soft plastics that people use for bass fishing. namely the sluggo. That was one of my favorites, still is. And to fish a sluggo correctly, you have to have an offset worm hook. That's that funny looking J hook that's got the couple right angles at the top. Kind of, I don't know. This is a podcast. It's not TV, but look it up. Worm hook. It was just, I don't know. Owner just made a better one, and I was using light wire ones too. I needed something that wasn't real bulky and real easy to put into a sluggo or any soft plastic for that matter, worms, whatever. And they just made the best one. That's all there was to it. Their 1/0 and 2/0 were my go-tos, and that's what started it. And then when I started to get into serious bottom fishing and going for patch reefs, rock piles, things like that, especially on the West Coast, I just naturally went to them, and I am very satisfied. They're great. So there you go. Circle hooks are a requirement for reef fishing. They have to be inline. They cannot be offset. Remember that they're not the ones that are bent offset from the center line. They're inline, so keep that in mind. They will not allow you to use stainless anymore. It's against the rules. You go in a shop now, and almost all the packages, whether it's Owner, Mustad, or whoever, will say on it that reef safe, reef to use, legal to use on reefs, stuff like that. It'll be right on the package. And most of these shops, especially here in the Keys, they don't sell the other ones anyway anymore. They're pretty much gone. So keep that in mind. Circle hooks are better than J hooks. I know. They are. That's all. You don't have to set the hook. For people using circle hooks, you will soon find that if you're an old timer like myself and you just start using them, you're going to have a hard time with it, because what do? You set the hook every time there's a bite. You jerk. You don't have to do that with a circle hook. When you feel the bite, you feel the weight of the fish on there, you just crank. You just turn the handle, and the hook sets itself. I know that some of you don't believe that, but it does, and it works really, really well. And it also almost always hook sets in the corner of the mouth, top or bottom of the mouth, in the jaw itself, not down inside, which is going to hurt the fish, especially with all the catch and release that's going on with regulations and stuff. You want to be able to release that fish alive, and that's where the circle hooks really come in. They're very, very handy for that. There are some uses for J hooks, long shanks for toothy creatures, things like that. But reality is, if you can get away with the circle, by all means, do so. I was asked what my favorite lure is. I laughed just like I'm laughing right now. Like them all. No, I'm just kidding. I don't really, I love soft plastics, and that's what I use the most of. Whether it's DOA, Z-Man, Gulp. Those are my three big ones. And I use various different ones on different days. I don't know. It's like whatever strikes me, no pun intended. Paddle tails. I love paddle tail style, something that has a little more wiggle to it than like a straight soft plastic. I like Gulp because they stink real good. I like Z-Man because they stretch. When something grabs the tail end of it, it kind of snaps back like a rubber band, and you don't typically lose the tail end of the lure. There's lots of, but those are the things that I really like. I also like, the hard bait styles, the Miro lures and the Ozuris, but they're costly, and we have toothy freaking barracuda here. And there's nothing worse than spending $9.99 on a really nice lure that's just perfect. You get a fish or two, and then a cooter just snaps it right off, and it's gone. Yeah, I know wire. Yes, they snap wire too. They're real good at that, by the way. So I don't know. I've gone to soft plastic because they do what they need to do in the wiggle factory. They look great, but at the same time, if you lose them, it's nowhere near as costly. A whole package of Gulp's going to run you $7. So that's if they asked me my favorite. There you go. Now you know. It's not that I don't try everything else. I do, and I'll see something on TV or I'll read something in a magazine and go, that's interesting, and I'll go try it out. But the soft plastics that you just stick on a lead head jig, those are my favorites. So there you go. Do I use a hook out device? Yes, I do. The one I use it's old and it's standard. It's a T-bar looking thing. It's got a T handle on it. It comes down to a funny little double loop on the bottom. It's impossible to tell you how it looks on a podcast. It's weird. But if you go in and say, I want a hook out, it's got a T top in it, and it's got this funny little circle at the bottom. They'll know exactly what to go get. I'm sure it's described to them multiple times in tackle shops. That thing's great. It's fantastic. You need to be taught how to use it, and there's usually instructions with it, or the guy behind the counter will certainly show you. But that is my go-to for popping the hook out of the mouth. And now in that same vein, Spain, I got this question. I think it was the same person, and said, "What about fishing pliers?" That was it's okay. So I have the most expensive pliers you can buy. I have a pair of Van Stahls. I've had them for 25 years. Yeah, at least. Yeah. Yeah, at least one. Now that I think back, it had to be 25 years ago. Van Stahl makes the world's greatest fishing reel. They really do. I don't care what anybody says about anybody else's reel. Van Stahl makes the best reel that I have ever fished with. And I've fished with them all. I really have. So it's coming from an expert here. The Van Stahls are built like tanks. They have the best drag system on the planet. Speaking of tanks, they'll stop a tank too. They're really incredible reels, and they last forever. I still have my original ones I bought, and they're still in working condition. So when I went to get a pair of pliers, I was in Fort Myers, and I remember I went to Reels Inc., which was owned by a friend of mine, Dean Hicks, and he was showing me some stuff, and he says, you got it. You get this pair. And I'm like, come on, man, they're like $250. And that was back then. And I'm like, holy cow. Well, guess what? I still have them. I looked them up recently. They sell for $329 now. They're just fantastic. I mean, they're just well manufactured. I have lost mine twice in the water and gotten them. I lost them down here one time, and of course that's easy. You can see them. And then I lost them alone at my brother's house in Pine Island up against the dock. They slipped off the dock and went in the drink. He spent 2 weeks hunting for them, trying to get them off the bottom in murky water, tan and all that fun stuff. And he got them, by golly. He found them and got them back to me. 2 weeks in salt water. They still work just fine. I oiled them, cleaned them, just made sure everything's going, and they are still in my pocket. And yes, I tie them to myself, or at least to the boat, to make sure that they're not going to go overboard. Now, are there other pliers? Yes, I have been given tons of pliers by tons of manufacturers. A lot of them will send you a pair and go try these, and they're nice. They're lightweight aluminum. A lot of them are aircraft grade aluminums. They're really, really nice, and they sell for $89, $99. That's great, but they're not a pair of Van Stahls. I'm sorry, they just aren't. I've been there. I've done it. I've experienced them. So there you go. It's your budget. You can spend $49.95. I've seen some pliers that look really good and look like they'll last at $49.95. But I know damn good and well they're not going to last through the saltwater environment for longer than, if you're a regular fisherman, 5 or 6 years, and then you'll replace them. Now you're at $100, and then you do it again, you're at $150. You see where I'm going with this, right? So anyway, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Live bait, white bait, of course. I don't throw a net anymore, so I don't use it. I'm too old for that, too. I'm not that crazy. Plus, I have a bad back. But in the world of fishing, just about anywhere in Florida, if you can get white bait, that's where you want to be. You want to throw that cast net and get you a well full of, black out that well so you can't see the bottom of it, and use white bait. And I absolutely agree that's what you're going to do. That's all there is to it. In lieu of that, shrimp. I'm a big shrimp user, live shrimp. Everything eats a shrimp. Everything eats a shrimp. All the birds, all the fish, everybody, people, everything eats shrimp. Fish love it. The only drawback on shrimp that I can actually give you is live shrimp is that everything eats it. White bait, you can be pretty selective when you throw it down based on its size. You're typically, like on our reefs, you're going to get mutton snapper, you're going to get yellowtails, grouper, things like that. In the back, you're going to get snook and reds, sea trout. You're going to avoid a lot of the other stuff that's there. When you start throwing shrimp, you catch everything. You're going to get the catfish. You're going to get the bizarre stuff off the bottom on the patch reefs. But I kind of like that. It's fishing, right? The rod bends and you reel it up. So there you go. Frozen does work here. I have previously talked about it. When I was doing my radio show, I would tell people, try not to buy frozen shrimp. That was on the west coast of Florida, fishing the Sanibel Island area. If you use frozen shrimp, you're going to get a lot of catfish, and nobody wants to catch catfish. They just don't. So down here, it's a little different. When you start putting on frozen shrimp down here, you still catch all kinds of snapper and all kinds of fun stuff, and you don't catch a lot of catfish because our water is not it's not catfishy. I don't know any other way to describe it. It's just not catfishy. So there you go. So live shrimp works, frozen shrimp works, whatever you can get. I would recommend doing live over frozen just because it stays on the hook longer, and you can cut it into pieces and use it that way when you're fishing. I didn't get a question about fly rods or reels, so I'm not going to go there right now because I might do another future podcast just on that alone. I did a fly fishing one back a while back, I looked it up, August. It was back in August of last year. And people wanted more details on it, so I'm probably going to do another fly one, so I'm not going to touch on that here. However, I will do this. I was asked a specific question about fly line, whether I like floating or sinking, and I answered the email back, but I'll also tell you here, in the fly line world, I like floating fly line for most applications and intermediate for everything else. I'm not wild about sinking, mainly because I fish shallow water when I'm fly fishing. I'm usually in less than 3 feet of water, let's say just less than 4. And so most things I want it's going to be a floating line and the leader is going to drift the fly down anyway, down to the depth I need. There are times when I want stuff right on the bottom. That's usually after heavy wind, which has stirred the back country up and has milked up the water, and I want something right down in the fish's face. Then I'm going to use an intermediate sinking line, okay? But not a pure sinking, intermediate sinking. So it's still got a little bit of float to it. I hope that helps. I was also asked about flies and where to buy them, and I thought, well, that's interesting. Down here in the Keys, let me start up in Fort Myers, where my old stomping grounds were. 239 Flies, Lear's Economy Tackle. Both of those places have got a good selection of flies, and just go there. 239's got an amazing selection of flies. That's in Bonita, Florida. That's just south of Fort Myers, Florida, on 41, right off of 41, as you head out to Bonita Beach. Those guys have got a beautiful set of flies, got a lot of stuff available in there. In the Keys, Sandy Moret's shop down in Alamorada, the Florida Keys Outfitter. And then down in Key West, the Saltwater Angler. And there's one in Marathon that I have not been back to yet. I want to go. I got a note from somebody that says, man, you need to stop in this shop. They've really done a lot. In Marathon, it's a 7 Mile Fly shop. It's on the bay side, just before you get to the 7 Mile Bridge. And my next trip down, I'm going to make a stop in there. I was told there's a whole bunch of really quality flies in there. Now, what you really should do is tie your own. If you're a fly fisherman and you're asking me about what flies to get, I'm assuming that you're already fishing, that you're not learning, because usually when you start asking questions about flies, it's got nothing to do with the actual equipment that you use. And so in that light, tie your own. It's kind of a natural progression in the world of fly fishing. You come off a spin, you come off conventional, and you've gone to a fly rod, and because you're either crazy or you're fascinated, or both. And then you discover the fly is just the coolest thing you've ever done. That's what happens to most people. Take a lesson, you learn, and it's like, man, this is cool. Why didn't I do this before? And you start tossing these flies in the water. And what the attraction of flies for fly fishing is, they are lightweight. They imitate anything you want them to imitate, and they move through water naturally. When they drop in the water, they don't splash. They just kind of settle into the water. They don't freak fish out if the fish are hiding up under mangroves and stuff. They just work, and they work better. Ooh, am I going to say this? Yes, I'll say it out loud. They work better than lures. They just do. In most cases. The reason they work better, again, is presentation. Not so much that they're not designed any better, but presentation. They're quiet. And once you start fly fishing, boy, it's hard to go in the other direction. I'll tell you that right now. So tying flies is a natural thing. After you've used flies that are made by different companies and made by different fly shops and tied by other people, the fascination, I guess, starts to get you. And you go out and you get a vise and you go take a couple fly tying lessons at one of your local shops, which, by the way, all the ones I just mentioned do fly tying at their shops. So you can really, really start to figure out what to do with fur and feathers and all the artificial materials and things that are made now to make flies. And so that's kind of a natural step. So I encourage you to do that. If you're asking me like what flies to get, start tying your own. Just it's a really, really fun thing to do. And on those rainy days and those colder days, which Florida doesn't have a lot of, but when it's cold and chilly and nasty in the winter and you're just waiting for spring to bust out and all the big fish start to show up again, the reds and the snook and the tarpon, that's when you can spend your time tying flies, and it's a good thing. Before I sign off, thanks much for the notes. I mean, that's what made this podcast. Thanks so much for the notes and emails, texts, things like that. Keep them coming. I really appreciate it. And yes, rumor has it I'm working on book number 4. It has to be done. More about this as we move towards summer. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune in. My podcasts are scheduled for each and every Tuesday. If you enjoyed listening, please tell a friend, leave a review, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Catch You Outdoors is presented by the Waypoint Podcast Network. It's available on Waypoint and many of your favorite podcast providers. Facebook page is Catch You Outdoors. Website, waypointtv.com and catchyoutdoors.com. Until next time, get outdoors and enjoy.